Who's had a bad week?
I'm going to give my bad week to jumbo Chinese websites that sell a lot of cheap stuff. You've probably heard of some of these websites. They've basically become household names in Europe in recent years. AliExpress, for example.
Yeah, I have heard of it, but I try not to use it.
Yeah, I was going to ask, have you ever bought anything from AliExpress or
TEMU?
Or Temu? Temu, I don't know how you say it.
No, I haven't actually, because I just think it's not right to order stuff and get it shipped across the world. Yeah, it just feels like very bad for the environment.
Well, you're a better person than me, because I did place one regrettable order to one of these websites, Shein, the fast fashion website, many years ago. I think I bought a swimsuit or something. Anyway, it was back when this website was a lot less well known. But I clearly didn't ask myself enough questions about how this swimming costume could possibly be this cheap. And I'm very sorry, because in the years since then, Shein has racked up an impressive collection of criticisms about how it operates. Horrific working conditions in its factories where people sometimes work illegal 75-hour weeks. Shamelessly stealing the ideas of independent designers and knocking out really cheap copies of the same thing. And then, of course, as you've already mentioned, Dominic, there is the huge environmental cost of this kind of fast fashion, encouraging people to buy loads and loads of cheap, low quality, very, very unbiodegradable clothes and throw them into landfills when they inevitably start falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Shein. To give you another example that we've just flagged up, Temu. It's kind of like a Chinese Amazon. You've probably seen it come up in search results, even if you've never been on the website. They sell everything from furniture to electronics, again, at incredibly low prices. Like you could buy a smartwatch on Temu for €6. And again, there have been many red flags raised, including questions about whether the products that you buy there have potentially been produced using Uyghur slave labor. But despite all of the controversies, these Chinese websites have very much become a fixture of online shopping in Europe because they are so damn cheap. Why have these websites had a bad week? Well, Shein have had a particularly bad week because they have been singled out among these websites and are now being targeted by an EU investigation into their consumer practices. Temu was already under investigation, but it's also been a bad week for the Chinese e-commerce giants more generally. And I'll tell you why. If you were a worse person, Dominic, and you order things from Shein or Temu on the regular, you would know that if you do order from one of these websites, very often your item will come in a package that arrives in the post directly from China.
As opposed to like via a distribution center in Europe or something.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a really different kind of business model. And it is a part of why products from these websites are so cheap. Because basically there is this loophole in the EU's customs regulations that means that if the value of a parcel is under €150, you don't have to pay customs on it. And Chinese websites like Shein and Temu have factored this into their business model, right? So instead of having these Amazon-type distribution systems where you have like warehouses dotted all over Europe, and then when someone places an order, the item gets shipped from the nearest warehouse, Temu will ship your individual item in an individual package straight from China. So it's a neat way for them to avoid paying a bunch of tax as a company. Because imagine that they imported like a whole container load of smartwatches to Europe and then kept them in a warehouse here. They would have to pay customs duties on the shipment of smartwatches, right?
Mm-hmm.
So even though doing the deliveries directly from China makes things slower and it's a less agile kind of business model than the Amazon one, it is worth it for them because it helps keep their prices super, super low. Having said that, it's hardly the Chinese company's fault that the EU has this policy. Like, you can't really blame them for taking advantage of the fact that the EU itself has said they can't be bothered to inspect every little parcel and make sure that the customs fees are paid on them. Good for Temu, I hear you cry.
I didn't cry that.
The problem is that the fact that all of these little packages are shipped in individually from China to Europe, that means that a huge amount of counterfeit products are entering the EU this way. I'll give you an example. A little while back, my husband was trying to buy some guitar strings online. And there is one particularly iconic brand of guitar strings that a lot of guitarists know and love. So he was trying to buy some new strings. And he saw that the strings were way cheaper on AliExpress than they were anywhere else. And he thought, oh, okay, they do seem crazy cheap, but maybe they're coming directly from the factory that makes them. That is the case for a lot of AliExpress stuff. So he bought them. And when they turned up, the packet looked almost identical to the well-known brand. But the font was a bit weird. And they were fake. They were functioning guitar strings. But actually, when he went back to the listing on the website, buried in the text, they were described as a replica of the well-known brand. So there are a lot of these fakes coming in via these little brown parcels. A lot of these products also don't meet European safety regulations. There have been cases of babies' pacifiers which come apart and become choking hazards, electric heaters that risk catching fire, this kind of thing.
This all sounds very bad.
It does. And look, I should point out that some of the items that you might buy from these websites are going to be perfectly adequate in quality. After all, a lot of the stuff that you buy from Amazon or from your local shopping mall, of course, a lot of that stuff was manufactured in China. But this flood of little brown paper parcels, rather than big shipments that are usually subject to customs checks, that has made it way easier for products that are dangerous or fake to make their way here because of the lack of checks. Until now, because things might be about to change. The European Commission has said it wants way stricter controls on all of these parcels, and it wants to put an end to the system of parcels under the value of 150 euros being exempt totally from customs.
Aren't the US doing something quite similar right now?
Yeah, interesting timing. So this comes just after the Trump administration tried to shut down a similar loophole. Over in the US, Chinese e-commerce companies have until now been able to deliver to the US duty-free so long as the parcel is worth less than $800. That plan in the US is actually in limbo at the time of recording. But regardless of what ends up happening over on the other side of the Atlantic, apparently the European Commission does seem to be taking its lead from the Trump administration on this. Accidentally, I'm sure. I'm sure it's just coincidental timing.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this does all sound like a really good idea for the EU to bring in some checks in to make sure that customs are being paid and regulations are being met. But presumably it's going to cost quite a lot of money to actually do those checks.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you think about the mind-boggling volumes we're talking about. So just to give you an idea of how many of these little brown tax-free parcels get posted to Europe. Last year, 12 million of these parcels arrived every single day.
Oh my God. I find that so depressing.
More than 90% of them from China. So that is a lot of posts to check. I don't think anyone's suggesting that every single one of them would now be opened and examined by customs officers. It would be more about running lots of spot checks to reduce the risk of dodgy stuff getting in. Using AI to try to scan products is one idea that's been floated. But that is, of course, where ending the tax exemption for all of these little parcels comes in. Scrapping the exemption would bring in an estimated 1 billion euros in tax revenues a year.
Oh, great.
So that would be nice, yeah. And there's also been a separate suggestion from Maroš Šefčovič, who's the EU's trade commissioner, that along with making these parcels taxable, he has suggested that we should bring in an additional fee for retailers like Shein and TEMU to cover the processing costs of all of these parcels being checked. It's not clear right now how exactly that would work. And I should stress that all of this stuff is at the proposal stage. Because remember, just because the European Commission says it wants something to happen, it doesn't mean it will, right? They have to get the European Parliament to agree to it. They have to get the national governments to agree to it. But I do think there is a fairly good chance of some kind of crackdown on these Chinese websites happening. As you might have noticed from the international mood, trade restrictions are kind of in vogue right now. And, you know, there are a lot of costs involved in us buying this cheap Chinese stuff en masse that we don't really think about. Like, if you buy something on Temu, it might cost you as an individual just a couple of bucks. And I really do understand that for people on low incomes, sites like that can feel like a godsend. But at the same time, the fact that these products are so insanely cheap is something that is encouraging us all to stay addicted to this horribly unsustainable business model. And we are having to deal with mountains of extra landfill waste every year because so much of this stuff breaks so quickly. And that is not a cost that you see incorporated into the listing for the, €3 t-shirt that you might be buying from Shein. That is a cost that we're having to pay for collectively.
It really does sound to me like it might be like one of the rare things that European leaders could all agree on.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it will also benefit European businesses if the market isn't flooded with these cheap products. It seems like a win-win to me.
I mean, I suspect if there is action on this, it won't be overnight. Even in the US, the attempt to stop these duty-free packages coming in from Temu and Shein, etc., has been reversed, at least temporarily. And things move slower here in Europe. So I think we will be working on this one for quite a while.
Will we?
Well, the Baltic disconnection from the Russian energy grid happened ahead of schedule, so maybe this can too. Europe can surprise us. But this does make for quite an interesting first item in the in-tray of Liu Xiaoye. He's been China's ambassador to France for the last 5 years, and he has just been appointed as China's special ambassador to the whole of Europe. He's a guy who's known for being pretty aggressively anti-Western. So I don't think he's going to be happy about this crackdown on some of China's most successful companies. And I'm going to be very interested to see how he responds to this.